Plate spinning is a form of juggling you don't see that much anymore. And the reason why plate spinning is a really great symbol for stress is because eventually you have to run back and just make sure every plate is spinning. You have to look at every single one when they start to kind of wobble. And you never get to put anything on just autopilot. You don't start it and then never have to go back to it. You have to go back to it. You never get to relax. Juggling plates, it's not easy, it's not relaxing. And if you don't ever stop, then you just keep going and going and going. And we adopt this concept then of juggling when we talk about our work week. We say, I have a lot of things on my plate right now, right? Or we say, I'm just juggling a lot of stuff this week. All that to communicate that life is busy, that life is stressful, and it all starts in school, right? It all starts in school. Everything's great until you have to go to school. And in school, you get tested, you get graded, you got homework, you're introduced to all these new concepts like peer pressure and drama and rejection and acceptance. And then another plate starts to spin in somewhere in there, and that's love. And then you talk about who you're going to date, who likes you, who doesn't like you. Love turns into another plate, that's marriage. Marriage turns into another plate, that's kids. And then that could be however many plates you and your wife decide to have. Some of them are bigger plates than others. Then you have your family life, then you have your social life, then you have this giant serving tray that you have to spin that's called your career, and then you've got bills and income and debt and retirement, and the plates just keep coming and coming, and they all need to stay spinning. And so that's a lot of pressure, and if one more plate comes your way, then you say, oh sure, let me drop everything and do this, right? It's just another way to talk about juggling. And then in all of that stress, when it's just at its highest and you're just feeling the pressure, that's when you sit down in church and the preacher reads Matthew 11:30 where Jesus says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And you think, yeah, right. If that's the case, then why am I so stressed out? What is stress? Stress is a mental anguish, right? It's an emotional strain. It's tension, and it results from just all the adverse circumstances in your life. Jesus said in John 16, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. And in the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Do you have peace in the world? So what's up with being a Christian? I mean, shouldn't I have more peace? Well, absolutely you should have more peace, and I don't think Christ wants you to have stress. But just look at what Jesus says here about reassurance. He says, take heart, right? He says, I have overcome the world. For 6 weeks, we're talking about what it means to feel overwhelmed. When life is too much, when the world's closing in, when each one of us battles a darkness or a desperation or an anxiety, and when we just feel that soul-clenching pain. If we face stress, if we face death, how do we cope with that? How do we go from feeling overwhelmed to feeling like Christ says that we can overcome? What happens when you're standing on the edge of the cliff and you're just wondering, okay, life, which way are you going to push me? Christ doesn't want you to feel that way. He wants you to overcome. But notice what Jesus says specifically. He says, take heart, right? What does that mean? It means don't worry. Because you see, I think, and just tell me if you agree with me, the majority of the stress in my life, it's all fear-based. It's control-based. I have fears, and so because I have fears, I stress. I have feelings of failure, being a bad dad, being a bad student, being a bad husband, being a bad employee, fears of stressing out, fears other people are doing things, going places, accomplishing more than me, fears of abandonment, worrying that everyone's going to leave me. We're in the book of Daniel. We're looking at a guy who experienced the most stressful time we can't even imagine what Daniel was going through. Last time we saw Daniel, his whole world had turned upside down. Babylon had come in and burned his city to the ground, taken all the young men off to Babylon, which we saw was modern-day Iraq. All the poorer people, weaker people, they were left behind. Daniel's then forced into this concentration camp where he has to learn Babylonian culture. He's got to learn to speak Babylonian, dress Babylonian. They give him a new Babylonian name. And then on top of all of that, they say, we want you to eat our cooking too. And when all of that happened, when they were in all of that tribulation, even then, while it's going on, we don't ever see God whispering to Daniel, right? We don't ever see God saying, or especially when he's still in Israel. When Daniel, let's say Daniel's still in Jerusalem, he's still in the Holy Land. We never see God say, okay, Daniel, I know life's going pretty good now, but just so you know, in a couple of weeks, life's going to go the other direction and it's going to get pretty bad. But I just want you to know, just take heart, don't worry, I'm going to be with you. We don't see that. There's no warning that comes. When plates start dropping, you don't get a notification that that's going to happen. And then even during the time when that was happening, when Daniel's being forced to eat the food that he doesn't want to eat, God's not whispering in his ear. We don't have this verse that says, God says, well, no, now I want you to push that aside. I don't want you to eat it. I want you to take a stand, and don't worry, I've got your back. We don't see that either. Daniel doesn't get any guarantees. And so I would argue we normally don't either, right? We don't have that voice all the time. When we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it's quiet, it's dark, it's lonely. And I don't know what your struggle is. I don't know what's stressing you out this morning. I don't know what's causing you to feel overwhelmed this morning. But here's what I do know. God is greater than anything you are going through. And he is able to pull you through it. Last week we saw in Daniel 1:8, it said, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. So Daniel tells his prison brainwashing guard, no way, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. And that's a pretty bold thing to do, to openly defy the nation that just burned down your house, right? You know, sometimes we ask, well, what can one person do? What can I do? What difference can one person make? We're going to see what one person can do in verse 9. Daniel 1:9 says, and God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. How fast did things turn around for Daniel? Immediately. We said last week that verse 8 was crucial because the nation was trying to brainwash him and trying to get him to go one way. And in verse 8 it says, but Daniel, right? The nation wanted to do this, wanted him to do this, but Daniel decided to do something different. And then what do we see at the beginning of verse 9? And God. But Daniel refused, he stood his ground, and God moved and intervened. When is God at work? When is God at work? Right now, right? John 5:17, Jesus says, my Father is working until now, and I am working. And you see, we read these stories in the Bible, they're cute. We remember learning about Daniel when we were in Sunday school, and we believe all these things that God is just a back then God. That sure, God does things, he talks to people, he does miracles, but you know, that was back then. But I want you to hear something this morning, and that's God is not stuck in the past. Continuing on in verse 10, it says, the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you are in a worse condition than the youths who are your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. And then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed to you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So Daniel gets a little pushback from the guy who's in charge. He kind of says, I'm sorry, man, but I don't want this to come back on me. I'm supposed to make you into a model slave, and so, that's what I have to do. And then Daniel says, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry. I don't know why I brought it up. Right? No. He doesn't budge. Daniel says, all right, well, let me give you another option. Right? He's determined. And so it would be normal for him to kind of buckle at this point. I mean, you're a prisoner. You have no rights. When you've been captured by a nation whose kind of MO is to kick down doors and burn anybody they see, you wouldn't be slighted for giving in at this point. Daniel doesn't do that. Why? Because Daniel, for him, following God isn't something he only does when it's convenient or when life is going well. He's still a God follower. He's still a God truster when his world is falling apart, even during a time of stress. And because Daniel doesn't buckle, because he doesn't give in, because he doesn't compromise, how does it all work out for him? Daniel trusted God in the situation, and then what happens? Verse 14. So he listened to them in that matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away all their food and wine, and they were given to drink water and given them vegetables. Eat your vegetables, kids. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams, and at the end of the time, when the king had commanded them that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought him in before Nebuchadnezzar, before the king. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them found none was better than Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah when they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king acquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in all the kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. And I know, we can read all that, and on the surface it sounds like, yay, Daniel won, he scored a victory. But let's not kid ourselves. Daniel's still a slave, right? He's still a captive. He's still a stranger in a strange land, and I think in a situation like that, if it were us, maybe we wouldn't really be praying about our diet. We'd be praying about leaving, escape, freedom, right? And so I would just say that, believe me, Daniel still has a lot to worry about. He still has a lot of plates crashing down around him, but there is also something else that's more important. And that's that God never delivered Daniel from his captors. Rather, he delivered Daniel through the situation, right? And the same God who guides Daniel guides you. Why? Because he's a right now kind of God. Daniel trusted God, and because for Daniel, God was in control, whether he was at home or whether he was a slave in Babylon. By now, most of you know that I caved and I bought a truck, right? I couldn't handle the peer pressure anymore. Everybody in Texas had a truck. It was one of those things I just wanted. So what I love about having a truck is, for me, I don't know, I can only speak for myself, nobody knows how short you are. Because your car's tall automatically, so you pull up and people have to, they see you up there. The illusion is totally blown, though, when you have to open your door in the parking lot and you get out of your car. And you have to, there's a rope ladder to get back into the car. But what I've noticed about truck owners in Texas is they are deeply spiritual people. They are. They believe in the power of the truck. They talk about what they can pull. They talk about what they can haul. Chevy Silverado has a Texas edition, because why not? You want to associate your big car with the big estate. In fact, when I first moved here and I would relay some sort of trouble to somebody, they would eventually give me the same answer. Well, let me just get my truck. As if that solves everything, right? We got to move Peggy's bed from my house to hers. Well, let me just get my truck. I got to take care of this patch of dead grass in my house. Well, let me get my truck. And it makes me ask, and I wonder, what if followers of Jesus believed in the power of God the same way Texans believe in the power of their truck? Daniel didn't have a truck to drive him out of a mess. By whatever mess he was in, whatever the stress he was in, Daniel still knew the solution was God, right? He still believed in the power of God. He said, it doesn't matter how big this problem is. God will get me through it. Turn with me over to Psalm 102. I'll throw it up on the screen for you too. We don't know who wrote Psalm 102. It's this faceless person. It's a man, it's a woman. We don't know. All we know is the author is going through an affliction. Okay? It's someone who's walking through darkness, and in their pain they cry out to God. Psalm 102 verse 1 says, hear my prayer, O Lord, let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Incline your ear to me. Answer me speedily in the day when I call. Sounds like it could be any one of our prayers, right? when we walk through a stressful situation, when the plates are all spinning, and it feels kind of like, well, it feels like God's hiding, when it feels like our prayers are just drifting up and they're unheard, and we plead to God, please answer me. The writer says in verse 9, "For I eat ashes like bread and mingle tears with my drink." That's a word picture, isn't it? The author says, "I eat death for breakfast." You don't want to bump into that person. "Hey, how's it going, Steve?" "Oh, sometimes it just feels like I eat hot death for breakfast." Okay, I am never talking to Steve again, right? The author says, "I cry into my drink." You ever had someone ask you at the grocery store, "Hey, how are you doing?" And you say, "Fine." But inwardly, your soul is just crying out that you just want to tell them exactly how you're doing. And you don't even care that you don't even know them. You just want to unburden yourself and hug them and say, "Is your life a mess like mine?" You don't say, "Some days it feels like I eat burned garbage and I just cry into my rum and Coke every day." But you don't say that, because then you're that person. Nobody wants to be that person. That person's depressing. That person's a letdown. That person just, puts their burden on other people. And so you just say, "Great, how are you?" Verse 10 says, "Because of your indignation and your anger, for you have taken me up and thrown me down. My days are like an evening shadow, and I wither away like grass." You feel God in that passage? You know where God is in that verse? Does it feel like God is absent in that verse? That God is silent, that God's on vacation? Watch what the author says next in verse 12. "But you, O Lord, are enthroned forever. You are remembered throughout all generations." So even for this person, where's God? Even in all of their strife and troubles, even with all their plates spinning, for this person, where's God? On the throne, right? Yeah, my life is messed up. I've got lots of reasons to stress. And sure, some days it feels like I eat ash and I just drink tears all day long, but my God is on the throne. What does that mean? Well, it means we realize that God doesn't sit on a physical, actual throne of gold. What it means is we understand that God is in control, right? That God is sovereign, that God reigns, that we live in His kingdom. God is on the throne. When? In the past? No, right now. God is on the throne right now. On the throne is God. Are you stressed about anything in life right now? Are you feeling overwhelmed about anything in life right now? Let me just ask you, then where is God for you? Where is God in your life for you? Last week we said God's bigger than anything you're going through, right? God's bigger than anything you're going through, and we said, where is your focus? Is your focus on God? Because He's going to get you through this. Today we're saying God's going to get you through. Why? Because He's on the throne. When the plates are all spinning, when the plates are even falling, where's God for you? Because just tell me something. If God is on the throne, then who is responsible to make meaning in my life? He is. See, with stress, I want to make meaning of my own life. I want to be in charge. I want to be in control, and maybe, captured by Babylon, I'd be kind of hatching this plan secretly all along. I'm going to get out of here, right? And all I've got is a spoon and a poster of Raquel Welch, but I've got a plan, right? I am getting out of this mess. If God is on the throne, then ultimately I just have to accept the fact that He's in control. And whether I escape or not, all of that, it's going to begin and end with God. So knowing that God is on the throne, I just want to map out what that looks like and show you what He's responsible for and what you're responsible for. Because sometimes I think in these situations we just ask, well, what can I do? I don't know what to do. What can I do? Well, let's see what we can do. God reigns so you can rest. He reigns, you rest. What can you do? You can rest. Listen, if you watch the news at night, you'd swear this world was falling apart. Why do you feel that way? Because it's their job to make you feel that way, and they do a really good job at doing it. Their job is to make ratings. And if you ask somebody who's stressing about life, about crime in America, they would tell you, crime is on the rise. But the truth is, it's not. Today, the national crime rate is about half of what it was at the height of 1991. Violent crime has actually fallen 51% since 1991. And property crime has fallen by 43%. In fact, violent crime is the lowest it's ever been right now in the past 45 years. The news has us stressing about crime, but the truth is, you could rest. You could be partying in the streets, leaving your doors unlocked, but you don't rest. We lock every door, we load our guns, we look through the window when we hear a noise outside. We could even stress out about illness. Seems like everybody we know is getting sick, and what's the truth? People are always getting sick, right? In fact, if I'm not sick or my friends aren't sick, we know somebody's sick because you never walk through a hospital and it's empty, right? The beds are always full. But the flip side of that is, statistically, as a nation, we are living longer and healthier and more productive lives. More people are living to older ages, and not just older, but productive, healthier ages. In the past 2 decades, medical advancements have helped people stay longer for longer periods of life than ever before. We could also stress about ISIS or Islam. We could stress about a bunch of things like that. But before that, it was Osama bin Laden. Before that, it was Saddam. Before that, it was Kim Jong-il. Before that, it was Hitler or Mao Zedong. And I remember growing up, we were all afraid of the Ayatollah. Remember him? Yes, ISIS is bad, but what's the reality? The reality is there have always been wars, there have always been evil men, and so you can either spend your days watching the news, stressing about our government, our leaders, our taxes, our spending, the state of marriage, our nation's enemies, our crime, or what? Or you could acknowledge that God is on the throne and that ultimately He's in charge. Psalm 47 says, God reigns over the nations. God sits on His holy throne. God sits where? Over the nations. Not in spite of the nations, not in lieu of the nations, not responding to, but over. God is in control. Yeah, God was in control in the past. No. Right now. God is a right now God. God is on the throne. He is in charge right now. And listen, nothing comes to this earth that is not first filtered through Him. God is in control. Yes, there is sin. Yes, there is disease. God is still in control. Yes, there is war. Yes, there is crime. God is still in control. And it is not your job to rule over it or govern it or solve it. It's God's. So stop stressing and you can rest. But here's the question. Well, if God is in control, then why doesn't He do something? Why doesn't He intervene? The question comes up a lot when you're a pastor. Well, God gives us freedom, and sadly, some people use their freedom to take other people's freedom away. We want God to hurry up then. Okay, hurry up, because we just don't like God's timetable. God seems to be doing nothing, but see, God is patient. Because God would rather more of His children come to trust Him and come to learn about Him. God isn't going to rush it because you just can't rush grace. Tell me something. If God stopped it all, stopped the world today, and ended it today, how many people in your own family or in your own circle of friends would go to hell? Count them on your fingers, and then tell me, do you want God to come today? Do you want Him to end it? Or do you want God to be in control and go by His timetable and His plan? 2 Peter 3 says, the Lord is not slow to fulfill His promise, as some count slowness, but He is patient toward you, and He's not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. God is a Father, and He's waiting for all His children to repent. God is not slow. The Bible says God has His own timing. Kings get to do that. People on the throne get to do that. You see, down here, we're in the thick of it, and so because our view is finite, then our response is urgent, right? Change it, do something, fix it, solve it. God, come today. God, stop, hurry. God, it's getting really bad down here. The world is so much worse than it was when I was a kid. I'm so glad I'm not a teenager in school with today's pressures. And you know, it seems we're just more stressed out and more worried about the state of the world than God is. You know what God says? Isaiah 66, thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. Do they still make lazy boys? I remember going to the state fair. There was the houseware section, and right next to the guy who's wearing the headset mic and he's selling the Ginsu knives, there's another guy next to him and he's selling lazy boys. And they were these recliners, and they had a footrest that was built into the chair. This is the picture of God in Isaiah 66. Where's God? Well, he's sitting with his feet up. Is God stressed out in this picture? No. Why not? Because he has a plan. Because he's in charge. Because he has a bird's eye view of the situation and he rules over the nations. You know why we're stressed? Because we don't have his perspective. In any situation. We just don't know his plans, and so we falsely then think, well, then I must be in charge. Hey, guess what? You're not in charge. Not my monkeys, not my circus. Hey, guess what? Obama's not in charge either. Nothing comes to this earth that is not first filtered through God. God is in control. God is in control of all of it. And you can either accept it and live by it, or you can reject it and you can stress. You are not going to find one verse in the entire Bible that tells you that it's okay to stress about your life. Philippians 4 says, do not be anxious about anything. Jesus says, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. 1 Peter 5, cast all your anxieties on him. Matthew 6:34, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious about itself. Psalm 55, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. Are you breathing right now? That's great. You are doing such a good job at that. Tell me, how are you doing that? How are you enabling that to happen? What are you doing? What effort are you doing right now to make yourself breathe? Did you get up this morning? That's wonderful. How did you do that? How did you consciously wake yourself up from sleep? I mean, you were in one state, and you were kind of like unconscious. How did you wake up? How did you do that? Did you do that? Did you have some sort of effort? Did you work at that? Did you practice that? How did you do that? Do you have any control over those things? The fact that you wake up each morning, the fact that you breathe, do you have any control over that? Matthew 6, which of you by being anxious can add one single hour or one span to your life? What does that mean? It means through worry, you can't add even a single hour to your life. Listen to me. Control is an illusion, and stress is a sin. Why is stress a sin? Because stress is anti-God, and it flies in the face of all of his promises. It flies in the face of his kingship. It flies in the face of his sovereignty because he is on the throne. God rules. God reigns. He's in control. And listen, when he rules over your life, when he rules in your life, you can release and let go of all of that stress and trust God. He reigns and you can rest. I cannot rest. I can't rest. Why not? Listen, if God is sovereign and he is on the throne, then you can rest. If you can't rest, then what's the point of him being king? What's the point of him being God in your life? Listen, if you want to know life's biggest secret and you want to learn how some people can just relax and go with the flow, it's right there. Yes, God allows pain in your life. Yes, God allows our world to come crashing down sometimes. Our nation gets burned. We're captured. Our identity comes under attack. Feels like we're forced to eat ash and drink our own tears. But Nothing comes to this earth that is not first filtered through God. He's in control of all of it. You know, as a parent, sometimes I like to play games with my kids, but sometimes I like to play games on my kids. Like when they're in the grocery store and they see some toy or something and they start to wander off, and your first impulse is to go after them and say, "No, Johnny, don't run away." But then you remember what your parents used to do to you, and you let them run off, and you just kind of watch them, and you kind of hide. And you want them, right? You can still see them. They've never left your sight. You're not a bad parent. But what you're hoping is that they're going to stop and then look around and go, "Oh no, I ran away too far," right? And then they're going to see that they're lost, or they'll feel like they're lost, but you can still see them. And the parents that see you and they see what you're doing, they kind of high-five you, and because they know what you're doing. They're like, "Yeah, I do that too." And you're hoping that the child realizes, "I've wandered off." And then you want the child to you want them to cry out, to say that they're lost, or to say that they need you. And then you come in and you act like the hero and you say, "I'm here, I'm saving you." But you want them to learn a lesson. You rescue them because you want them to learn that they're safe and that life is safer when they stay with you, right? And they also learn something else that's very important, that when they cry out, that you come running. Where do you suppose we as parents learn those lessons? Yes, God allows pain in your life, but it's to draw you close to Him. And in the case of Daniel and the Israelites, they did walk away. They forgot that it was safer at His feet. We forget that He's on the throne, and we wander into dark places on the map. And before we realize, we're lost. We don't need to stress. We just need to remember that it's His kingdom. He knows the map. He knows every sticker bush. He knows every cave. He knows every beast that would harm us. And when we cry out to Him, He hears us. And He always comes running.